You can name what happened. You can list the manipulation tactics. You can explain the cycle to a friend with clinical precision. And then at 2 a.m., you're still checking their social media, still replaying the one good memory, still feeling a pull towards someone you know damaged you. That contradiction isn't confusion. It's one of the most predictable effects of narcissistic abuse. And understanding why it happens is the first step to actually breaking it. Here's what most people get wrong about this stage of recovery. They assume that once you see the abuse clearly, the emotional attachment should dissolve. That awareness should equal release. And when it doesn't, they start questioning themselves. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I'm the problem. Why can't I just move on? But this isn't a willpower issue. It's not a sign that your perception is wrong. And it's not evidence that the relationship had more good in it than you're admitting. What's actually happening is that two systems inside you are operating on completely different timelines. Your thinking brain has caught up. Your emotional and nervous system conditioning has not. And those two things don't update at the same speed, especially after sustained exposure to someone who used intermittent reinforcement as a control strategy. That gap between what you know and what you feel? That's not a flaw. That's the architecture of a trauma bond doing exactly what it was built to do. Let's break down why. Awareness is cognitive, but trauma bonding is behavioral and emotional. The first thing to understand is that knowing something is abuse and being emotionally detached from it are two entirely separate processes. They use different parts of the brain. They respond to different inputs. And they operate on different timelines. Cognitive awareness lives in the prefrontal cortex. It's where you analyze, label, and make logical assessments. When you read about narcissistic abuse, and suddenly the entire relationship clicks into a pattern, love bombing, devaluation, discard, hoover, that recognition is a cognitive event. It's important. It's real. But it is not the same thing as emotional release. Trauma bonding, on the other hand, is encoded in the limbic system and the body. It's built through repeated emotional experiences, cycles of fear and relief, rejection and reconciliation, cruelty and tenderness. Those cycles don't just create memories. They create conditioned responses. Your body learned to associate that person with both danger and safety, and that association doesn't get overwritten by an article or a YouTube video. It gets overwritten by sustained new experience over time. Here's what this looks like in practice. You're sitting across from a friend explaining exactly how the narcissist manipulated you. You're articulate. You're clear. You sound like you've fully processed it. Then you get home, see a photo of them, and your chest tightens. Your throat constricts. You feel a wave of longing that makes no logical sense based on everything you just said out loud. That's not hypocrisy. That's not weakness. That's two different systems giving you two different outputs because they were shaped by two different processes. Your intellect was shaped by information. Your emotional body was shaped by hundreds or thousands of micro-experiences inside that relationship. And the emotional body doesn't respond to logic. It responds to pattern interruption, safety, consistency, and time. So if you've been judging yourself for still feeling attached after everything you now understand, stop using the wrong metric. Awareness was step one.
It was a necessary step.
But it was never the only step. Intermittent reinforcement strengthens attachment, even when the relationship is harmful. This is the mechanism most survivors underestimate, and it's the one doing the heaviest lifting inside a trauma bond. Intermittent reinforcement is a behavioral conditioning principle. It means that when a reward is given on an unpredictable schedule, sometimes present, sometimes withheld, with no reliable pattern, the subject becomes more attached to the source of that reward, not less. This has been demonstrated repeatedly in behavioral research. It's the same mechanism behind slot machines. The inconsistency is what creates the compulsion. Now apply that to a narcissistic relationship. The affection wasn't constant. The warmth wasn't reliable. The validation came and went without warning. Some days you were everything to them. Other days you were invisible or worse, a target. And because your brain was constantly trying to predict when the good version would return, it became hypervigilant, anxious, and deeply fixated on that person. You weren't attached because the relationship was good. You were attached because the relationship was inconsistent. And your nervous system interpreted that inconsistency as significance. Here's a pattern many survivors recognize. After a stretch of coldness or conflict, the narcissist suddenly became warm. Maybe a kind text. Maybe a rare moment of vulnerability. And in that moment, the relief you felt was enormous, out of proportion to what actually happened. A normal kind gesture felt like emotional salvation. That's not because you're dramatic. It's because the contrast between deprivation and reward amplifies the emotional impact of the reward. That amplification is what makes the trauma bond feel like love. It's not love. It's a conditioned response to an unpredictable reward schedule. And the longer you were exposed to that pattern, the deeper that conditioning runs. This is why no contact is so frequently recommended, not as a punishment, not as a power move, but because it is the only way to stop the reinforcement schedule from continuing to operate on your nervous system. Every point of contact, even a small one, has the potential to re-engage the cycle. If you're watching this and recognizing these patterns playing out in your own experience, there's a free trauma bond self-assessment linked in the description below. It's not a quiz. It's a structured tool designed to help you identify where you actually are in the trauma bonding cycle, not where you think you should be. That difference matters. Take a look when you're ready. I'm curious about something. A lot of people in this stage of recovery describe a specific moment where they realized their awareness and their emotional experience were completely out of sync, where they understood the abuse intellectually but felt something entirely different in their body. If that's happened to you, what did that gap feel like? Drop it in the comments. Because naming it accurately is part of how you start closing that gap. Your nervous system stays bonded to familiar chaos, making detachment feel unnatural at first. This is the point that catches people off guard the most, because it explains something almost no one talks about: why the early stages of recovery often feel worse than the relationship did. Your autonomic nervous system, the part of you that regulates stress, arousal, rest, and threat detection, adapts to its environment. If you spent months or years in a relationship defined by unpredictability, emotional volatility, and cycles of crisis and calm, your nervous system calibrated to that rhythm. It became your baseline, not because it was healthy, because it was familiar. And when something is familiar to the nervous system, it registers as normal, even when it's destructive. This is the same reason why people who grew up in chaotic households often feel uneasy in stable environments. It's not that they prefer chaos. It's that their system was wired to operate inside it. Stillness feels like something is wrong. So when you leave the narcissistic relationship, or when it ends, you might expect to feel relief. And cognitively, part of you does. But your nervous system may respond to the absence of that person like it's lost something essential. Not because they were essential, but because the activation pattern they created, the adrenaline, the cortisol spikes, the hypervigilance followed by temporary relief, had become your normal operating frequency. Here's what this looks like. You're out. You're safe. And yet you feel flat, empty, restless. You might even feel bored, and then immediately feel guilty for feeling bored, because what kind of person misses that? But you're not missing the abuse. You're experiencing the neurological withdrawal from a high arousal cycle that your body was adapted to sustain. This is also why rebound relationships after narcissistic abuse often recreate similar dynamics. The nervous system seeks what it recognizes. And until that system is actively recalibrated through safety, consistency, and intentional recovery work, It will keep steering you toward what it already knows, even when your conscious mind is fully aware that it's harmful. Detachment from a trauma bond doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like loss. It feels disorienting. Sometimes it feels physically uncomfortable, like your body is rejecting the quiet. That response is not a sign you made the wrong decision. It's a sign the bond was deep, the conditioning was real, and your system is adjusting to a rhythm it hasn't learned to trust yet. So here's what all of this means when you put it together. If you still feel attached to someone who abused you, even though you can clearly identify the abuse, you are not broken. You are not in denial. And you're not choosing this. You're dealing with 3 overlapping systems that were shaped by a sustained pattern of psychological manipulation. A cognitive system that has updated and now sees clearly. An emotional system that was conditioned through hundreds of micro-experiences and hasn't caught up yet. A nervous system that adapted to chaos as its operating environment and is now disoriented by its absence. That's not a personal failure. That's a structural problem with a structural solution. Recovery from trauma bonding is not about trying harder to let go. It's about understanding what's actually holding the bond in place and then methodically addressing each layer. The cognitive layer, the emotional layer, the somatic layer. In that order, at a pace your system can actually integrate. Most people stall in recovery because they've only addressed the first layer. They've read the books, watched the videos, named the abuse correctly, and then they wonder why they still feel pulled. It's because the other 2 layers haven't been touched yet. Not because the work isn't happening, but because the work that's needed isn't just intellectual. This is recoverable, but it requires a process that matches the actual problem, not just the surface-level version of it. If this video described something you're currently experiencing, the most useful next step is the free trauma bond self-assessment in the description. It will help you identify which stage of the trauma bonding cycle you're actually in right now, so your recovery work can target the right layer, not just the most obvious one.